Member Week is here at Lowe's. Don't miss your chance to get up to 40% off hundreds of items like paint, tools, home essentials, and more. Shop our exclusive deals happening in-store and online now through July 18th. Not a rewards member? Join for free today and get ready to save more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
The intense interest aroused in the public by what was known at the time as the Styles case has now somewhat subsided. Nevertheless, in view of the worldwide notoriety which attended it, I have been asked, both by my friend Poirot and the family themselves, to write an account of the whole story. This, we trust, will effectually silence...
In the afternoons, it was the custom of Miss Jane Marple to unfold her second newspaper. 2 newspapers were delivered at her house every morning. The first one Miss Marple read while sipping her early morning tea, that is, if it was delivered in time. The boy who delivered the papers was notably erratic in his management.
It is difficult to know quite where to begin this story, but I have fixed my choice on a certain Wednesday at luncheon at the vicarage. The conversation, though in the main irrelevant to the matter in hand, yet contained 1 or 2 suggestive incidents which influenced later developments. I had just finished carving some boiled beef, remarkably tough, by the way, and on resuming my seat, I remarked, in a spirit...
I don't pretend to be an author or to know anything about writing. I'm doing this simply because Dr. Riley asked me to. And somehow, when Dr. Riley asks you to do a thing, you don't like to refuse. Oh, but Doctor, I said, I'm not literary at all. Nonsense, he said. Treat it as case notes if you like. Well, of course, you can look at it.
Lynette Ridgway. That's her, said Mr. Burnaby, the landlord of the 3 Crowns. He nudged his companion. The 2 men stared with round, bucolic eyes and slightly open mouths. A big scarlet Rolls-Royce had just stopped in front of the local post office. A girl jumped out, a girl without a hat and wearing a frock that looked only large. A girl with golden hair and straight autocratic features. A girl that looked like she
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and this is an episode, listeners, on which we will be talking about many of those full-length mystery novels by Agatha Christie. We won't be ranking them, but we will be considering them because today's topic of conversation is the audiobooks of Agatha Christie. I hope you enjoyed my little intro there. I wanted to give a taste of what is available to those who listen to Agatha Christie audiobooks. There is so much out there. We have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. The first part of this episode is going to be me, myself, and I. As usual, I will be doing a little bit of an overview and consideration of audiobooks as a subset of the array of book formats that are available to book readers. And then I'll be doing an overview of the audiobooks that exist for Agatha Christie titles specifically. In the second part of this episode, I will be speaking with Gray Robert Brown, who many of you will know as the co-host of The Swinging Christies, along with friend of the podcast, Dr. Mark Aldridge. So Gray is a podcaster, he is a writer, and he is also very much involved in the world of audiobooks because he is involved in audio production at Penguin Random House. That is Gray's day job, and quite a day job it is. We had such a great conversation. I cannot wait to bring that to you. But first, let's figure out what we mean here when we talk about audiobooks. To start us off, I'd actually like to read out a message I got from one of you listeners upon discovering that I was going to do an episode on audiobooks. Here goes. I'm really pleased that you'll be doing an episode on audiobooks, smiley face. You're right that Hugh Fraser is excellent, although he makes Ariadne Oliver too annoying for me. I found it really interesting that when I've listened to both David Suchet and Joan Hickson, they both speak much quicker as their on-screen characters in audiobook than they do on screen. It really highlights the different skills required. I've listened to most of the Peter Dinklage styles on Audible, and whilst I'm enjoying it, it is an audio adaptation rather than an audio book, so far more comparable to John Moffat BBC radio productions than the novel or an audiobook. Looks like I'm easily annoyed because Audible bugs me when it categorizes adaptations as audiobooks. But it's far more important that there are a variety of ways to do Christie, accessible for as many fans as possible. Thank you for that message, listener, which is a perfect way to get into this episode because it touches on pretty much all the major areas I want to cover. And I love that Hugh Fraser is the first person that this listener mentions because, believe me, we are going to be speaking a lot about Hugh Fraser on this episode. Captain Hastings finally gets his due. He gets the respect he deserves in the world of audiobooks. More on that in a little bit. But what I also love about this message is that it frames the conversation in terms of accessibility. That last sentence that the listener wrote, it's far more important that there are a variety of ways to do Christie accessible for as many fans as possible. And that's where I want to begin because audiobooks make stories available to people who would not be able to read print texts for a variety of reasons, be they physical, logistical, educational, or something else. Very early on in this podcast, actually, my late and eternally lamented co-host, Catherine Brobeck, and I made an offhand comment about how we didn't really do audiobooks. They just weren't our thing. And we received this message from a listener that I tried to pull up because I wanted to read it out, but I couldn't find it because it's from so long ago. I'm sure it's archived somewhere. Basically, this listener was informing us as kindly and gently as possible that our perspective was ableist, since listening to audiobooks is a crucial means of reading to lots of people out there who cannot do it any other way. And that was really an educational moment for me. That had to have been around 2016 or 2017 because it was right when the podcast started. And since then, audiobooks have just exploded in popularity. They were already exploding in popularity at that point, but they've only gotten bigger. And I'll get a little more specific about that as well. But audiobooks are just a huge business. And it's why I'm so grateful to have Gray on the program later as someone who works within that business. I think his perspective is crucial here to help explain to us how that business works and where it might even evolve in the future. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just so excited to have Gray on. You know how I love to have guests on this podcast. As the listener whose message I just read out noted, there was recently this very big, noisy, in the best of ways, adaptation of The Mysterious Affair at Styles that came out. It was produced by Audible. It was an Audible original production. And it was a very big deal. The actor Peter Dinklage voiced Monsieur Poirot in it. He is the voice artist. And I should also just note, there is some fuzziness as to what we call the people who lend their voices to audiobooks. Some people say narrator, some people say voice actor, others say voice artist. I am going to try to use voice artist consistently during this discussion because I think it gets at what these people do. And while narrator is fine, I just think that it can get confusing since we obviously have narrators in print texts who have an entirely different function. So I'm going to try to use voice artist or at least voice actor and talk about people who are voicing these books. Anyway, Peter Dinklage voices Monsieur Poirot, and then there is a whole host of other actors who are brought in on this production to play the other characters. There is music, there are all sorts of sound effects added, just the whole shebang. Shall we listen to a little bit of it right now? Here's a taste.
The world is burning. Chaos is taking over. There is no order. Nothing in its right place. Good people killed and starved while criminals rule over them.
This is the vote for Dover! Dover! If you ain't got papers for Dover, you ain't getting up!
I can no longer put things right.
Next!
Not here.
Hello, sir. Come forward. Thank you. Papers?
Here you are.
Thank you. 9:14. Oh no, this is no good, sir.
Something is not in order.
It is not. No, you've had it stamped by the Belgian embassy, all right, but not the British embassy.
I see. So, this is how you blackmailed the others.
Oh, sorry, what did you say?
You took money from the lady in the green coat and the father with his son on his shoulders. You chose the moments when your superior, who's just there, was distracted, and you thought you could get away with it.
Look, I don't know who you are, and I don't care, all right? You're just a face on a boat, and this is how it works.
We are leaving our country with our lives in our hands, and you choose to steal from us.
Hey, it's not my fault the Kaiser invaded. Now, do you want to get on this boat or not?
I would like my papers back.
Have them. It's your funeral.
Merci.
Next!
Okay, so for those of you who have not listened to this Audible production, you probably have some questions. Having listened to the beginning of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, brought to you by Audible. This is very different from the textual beginning of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, isn't it? I actually made a point of clipping Hugh Fraser at the very beginning of this episode, providing his talents as the voice artist for The Mysterious Affair at Styles, in which he simply reads out the text verbatim. What Audible is doing here is very different. And there is a lot to celebrate about it. Peter Dinklage is great. The acting is generally top-notch. This is well produced. It really grabs you. It gets you right into the scenes with all of that music and the sound cues. There's a lot going on here. But this Audible version of The Mysterious Affair at Styles is not an audiobook. It's a radio play. As Agatha Christie wrote this book, we certainly do not open on Poirot, the Belgian refugee, making his way into the UK and catching out a scam. No such scene exists in the book, right? Also, Hastings is not narrating this story whatsoever, as he does in the book. There is no interiority here for Hastings. And really, from this opening scene, the changes just continue to pile up. Alfred Inglethorpe is American. Cynthia Murdoch is barely in this adaptation, etc., etc. It's not bad. I want to be very clear about this. It is very well done, and I enjoyed the heck out of this adaptation. But it is an adaptation, and yet it was packaged as though it were an audiobook. And the listener who wrote in was also annoyed by this. I feel like someone listening to this Audible production of The Mysterious Affair at Styles in a casual way, who doesn't know that much Christie, could easily think that this is precisely what Christie wrote. And I think that the fuzziness there between audiobook and audio adaptation could potentially be problematic. So I just want to flag that fuzziness, because I hadn't realized that it existed until listening to this adaptation of The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And I think it's something that we're really just starting to grapple with as the audiobook industry continues to expand and grow bolder and more audacious, right? And do productions like this. The audiobook industry seems to be edging into a territory that was once the sole domain of radio plays, right? And in the UK in particular, there is a long tradition of these radio plays, not so much here in the United States, which is why people still write to me on a consistent basis, bemoaning the fact, always in a very nice way, that we don't talk more about the radio plays on All About Agatha. But Catherine and I did not listen to those radio plays growing up when we were becoming Agatha Christie fans. And they're just not as much in the fabric of the culture when it comes to Christie and mystery fandom as they are for people in the UK and perhaps in other territories as well. But you know what? We're all headed in that direction, as evidenced, I think, by this Audible production of The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And this is something else that I am going to talk about with Gray, because I just think that we're going to be getting a lot more of this. And it's worth considering what is happening here with this adaptation and others like it, and where the industry might go in the future. So I will be looking forward with Gray in the second half of this episode. But for now, let's take a little look back at the history of audiobooks. This is a very quick overview. I don't want to spend too long on this, but believe it or not, the first quote-unquote talking books made their debut in the United States, at least, all the way back in 1931, the year that the Sittaford mystery was published. This is early in Agatha Christie's career, right? She had been publishing for only about a decade, just over a decade at this point. And this was when the American Foundation for the Blind and the Library of Congress initiated the Talking Book program. So we can see from the very beginning that accessibility was key here. The idea was to provide a means for people who could not see to be able to read more easily. And I love this, but the first test recordings that were made of these talking books included a chapter from Helen Keller's book, Midstream. That makes sense for an initiative that would be so crucial for seeing impaired people. But you know what was also one of the first recordings ever made? A spoken version of The Raven by the father of detective fiction himself, depending on who you're asking, Edgar Allan Poe. I love it. And I could see how people would be eager to memorialize The Raven. It's a great poem to say aloud. I've always loved that one. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. There aren't that many opening lines of poems that I can just pull out of my head like that. Anyway, these early talking books were recorded onto vinyl records. And then as recording technology progressed through the 20th century, audiobooks progressed along with them. Cassette tapes were invented in 1963, which gave rise to books on tape. That is a phrase that still trips off the tongue for me. I listened to lots and lots of books on tape in my day, especially as a kid. Eventually, compact discs or CDs would replace cassette tapes. And then, of course, we'd get digitized audio recordings as early as the mid to late 1990s. Audible actually debuted the first digital audio player in 1997. And by 2009, digital downloads of audiobooks had surpassed CDs as the most popular audio format. And since then, the audiobook industry really hasn't looked back. It has had double-digit increases in annual revenue growth pretty much every year since then. And as of last year, in 2024, there were sales in excess of $2 billion for that year alone, at which point it was estimated that more than half the adult U.S. population has listened to at least one audiobook. That is just an incredible mushrooming of growth and strength for this industry, especially in the 21st century. And I don't think it shows any signs of stopping. I mean, let's be honest, you're listening to a podcast right now, which is another form of audio production that wouldn't have existed 20 years ago, at least not in as popular and mainstream a way as it does now. People are just a lot more comfortable with and adept at consuming their content by way of their ears. Also, very early on, and I think this is crucial, there was a core educational aspect to audiobook recordings. They were distributed to libraries and schools in the United States as early as 1955. I think many of us can remember books on tape or CD at our local library or our school library, and just how important they were in terms of developing our love of literature, in addition to the print reading that so many of us were doing. So really, audiobooks have been around for nearly as long as Agatha Christie herself, which is why we have such an embarrassment of riches where the audiobooks of Agatha Christie are concerned. And this is something that Gray and I will discuss later in the episode, but in the pre-digital age, when audiobooks were tied to physical objects, vinyl records, cassette tapes, compact discs, often they had to be abridged because otherwise there would just be too many records or tapes or CDs involved. So this is why many of those earlier educational audiobooks tended to be abridged. And that makes sense because teachers often make use of abridgment, even in print literature, right? Since children's attention spans aren't always suited to extremely lengthy texts. And I think this is another reason that audiobooks were used a lot in educational settings. Let's not underestimate what a relief it must have been, and still is, for teachers to pop in an audiobook rather than having to read it aloud themselves or try to force their students to read it on their own. This really isn't the same as popping in a television or film adaptation. Listening to an audiobook captures the imagination. It engages the brain in the same way that reading a print text does. This is something that Catherine and I discussed actually on an early Patreon episode dealing with those radio plays of Agatha Christie, which, as I mentioned, are so popular in the United Kingdom. We wanted to throw a little love to the radio plays as soon as we started that Patreon account, since we knew so many people were so annoyed by how little we talked about them on the regular podcast. And we realized that radio plays are suited to the adaptation of texts in a way that films and television shows and theatrical plays really aren't, because there's just a lot more that can be preserved from page to microphone. And the way in which a listener encounters a radio play is extremely similar to the way that a reader encounters a text. Listening is just a great means of learning. And it's why audiobooks just have such an important place in classrooms. I see this in my own child's classroom, by the way. My oldest child is in elementary school, and I volunteer there from time to time whenever I can. And they do a lot of audio work. They often break up into small groups and kind of rotate among a bunch of different activities. And one of the tables has headphones and little audio stations set up, and they do a series of lessons by listening to them. And they can sort of go as quickly or as slowly as they want because they're individualized audio sessions. And the kids love it, as do the teachers. So all of this is just to say that audiobooks are a great fit for educational purposes. In addition to the entertainment value of Agatha Christie's books, which no one is going to dispute on this podcast, we've got lots of educational value for many of the audiobooks, and in particular, the abridged, more scholastic audiobooks of Christie's work that have been created over the years. But lest we be here for 18 hours, I am not going to go through all those more scholastic audiobooks of Agatha Christie. Not because they aren't important or interesting, but simply because there is too much material and I have to draw the line somewhere. This is a familiar problem on the Maximalist podcast that is all about Agatha. So, with apologies to voice artists like Roger May, who did such fine work for Collins English readers over the years, and the many older audiobooks of Agatha Christie that exist out there, I will be focusing on the more recent, verbatim, unabridged, officially licensed and sanctioned audiobooks of Agatha Christie, most of which were recorded and released in the 21st century. I will not be talking about all the pirated audiobooks of Christie's work that exist on YouTube and elsewhere. Feel free to take a trip inside YouTube, listeners. Oh boy, there is a lot of content available for free there. Much of it seems to be read by AI bots or just by people other than the voice artists that I am going to showcase here in my rundown. Also, I am limiting myself to English language audiobooks of Christie. I know there are a lot of non-English language audiobooks of Christie's work out there, and if you would like to tell me about them, shower me, please, over email with fun facts and anecdotes. allaboutthedame@gmail.com. But I will be sticking to English language audiobooks and really to English, or I should say British voice artists, with the exception of Peter Dinklage, who is American and who portrays Monsieur Poirot in that new Audible adaptation, which means he isn't doing any narrating. He's really just acting. All the voice artists I will be running through for these audiobooks are British, and that makes sense. If you're going to listen to someone voicing the very British novels of the very British Agatha Christie, you want it to be a British person. Though if anyone has any favorite American-voiced audiobooks of Christie's work they like to listen to, because I'm sure they do exist, let me know about them. I'd be curious to hear. I also just want to note that I am approaching this overview with a ton of humility because the world of audiobooks really is a wild and bewildering one, and I am certain that there is information that I am missing and or probably misconstruing, but I am doing my best here to be as accurate as possible. If something I say sounds off to you, or you have more information about a title or a voice artist or anything else, you know what I'm going to say. I would love to hear from you. Email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. Given that audiobooks are still fairly new to me, I'm sure I've got a lot to learn here, and I am always happy to learn it and then to share that information with all of you on a future episode. Okay, so you will be thrilled, though probably not surprised, to learn that every single full-length mystery novel written by Agatha Christie, all 66 of them, have audiobook formats. They have all been voiced by various people and are available alongside the hardcover, paperback, ebook, and any other versions of these books that exist. And boy, is there a lot of variety here. I'm going to start with Hugh Fraser, who so many of us already love as the actor who brings Captain Arthur Hastings to life in Agatha Christie's Poirot, starring Sir David Suchet. If you are not sure who has voiced a particular Agatha Christie audiobook, when in doubt, choose Hugh Fraser. There's a good chance that Hugh Fraser voiced it. He has been involved in 41 of the 66 Christie titles, nearly 2/3 of the entire canon. And yes, I think that there is a bit of a tie-in element here, right? It's wonderful to hear that voice that became so familiar to us while watching Agatha Christie's Poirot. It sort of connects that series to the book that one is listening to and services the fandom in that way. Let's take a little listen to the beginning of Peril at End House, as voiced by Hugh Fraser.
Chapter 1. The Majestic Hotel. No seaside town in the south of England is, I think, as attractive as St. Lowe. It is well named the Queen of Watering Places, and reminds one forcibly of the Riviera. The Cornish coast is to my mind every bit as fascinating as that of the south of France. I remarked as much to my friend Hercule Poirot. So it said on our menu in the restaurant car yesterday, mon ami. Your remark is not original. But don't you agree? He was smiling to himself, and did not at once answer my question.
Let's give Hugh Fraser his due as a voice artist. He does accents, he does all sorts of voice inflections. His voice itself is just rich and velvety and lively and lovely. He is just very good at what he does. Does he make Ariadne Oliver annoying, as the listener who wrote into me claimed? Well, here's a little excerpt from one of my favorite Ariadne Oliver moments, which is the beginning of her fierce debate with Robin Upward about the nature of adaptation. This is from Mrs. McGinty's Dead, and it gives you a good sense of the different voices Hugh Fraser creates when he is doing what he does with these audiobooks.
At Laburnum's, collaboration was in process. Robin Upward was saying earnestly, "You do see, don't you, what a wonderful line that is, and if we really get a feeling of sex antagonism between the chap and the girl, it'll pep the whole thing up enormously." Sadly, Mrs. Oliver ran her hands through her wind-swept grey hair, causing it to look as though swept not by wind, but by a tornado. "You do see what I mean, don't you, Ariadne, darling?" "Oh, I see what you mean," said Mrs. Oliver gloomily. "But the main thing is for you to feel really happy about it." Nobody but a really determined self-deceiver could have thought that Mrs. Oliver looked happy. Robin continued blithely. "What I feel is, here's that wonderful young man, parachuted down." Mrs. Oliver interrupted. "He's 60. "Oh, no. He is. Well, I don't see him like that. 35, not a day older. But I've been writing books about him for 30 years, and he was at least 35 in the first one. But, darling, if he's 60... you can't have the tension between him and the girl. What's her name? Ingrid? I mean, it would make him just a nasty old man. It certainly would. So you see he must be 35, said Robin triumphantly. Then he can't be Sven Hjersen. Just make him a Norwegian young man who's in the resistance movement.
Oh, I love that. He's so good. Also, just a note, I actually mentioned this on my last Patreon episode, but I learned recently that the correct pronunciation of his last name is Fraser, not Fraser, which is how I had always been pronouncing it. We all know my checkered past with the pronunciation of British proper nouns, so hopefully I'm getting it right now. I am going to be calling him Hugh Fraser throughout, and I'm really crossing my fingers that this isn't another Bovril situation. Yes, I know it's Bovril, but I just wanted to flag that, particularly for Americans who might be wondering, why is he saying Fraser and not Fraser? Anyway, in the case of Poirot titles, and we have 33 of them, right? Half the canon is devoted to Poirot. Fraser is a near certainty among this smaller subset of Christie books. He has voiced 27 of the 33 Poirot titles, which means that there are only 6 that he didn't do. And I think it is interesting to examine why in the case of each of these 6. Okay, so the first is Murder in Mesopotamia. And there's a very easy explanation as to why Hugh Fraser doesn't voice this book, because Murder in Mesopotamia is the extremely rare Christie book to have a first-person female narrator. So this book is actually voiced by the fantastic Anna Massey, who Catherine and I gushed over when we covered 4 different adaptations of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca over on Patreon. Anna Massey played Mrs. Danvers to perfection in 1979 against Jeremy Sherlock Holmes Brett. And this little factoid is just so delicious, but these two were divorced at the time that they played those roles. Talk about subtext. I excerpted from this novel in one of the clips that I used for the start of the episode. I love Anna Massey's voice for this novel. I think she lends a wry knowingness to the first-person narration of Nurse Amy Leatherin, one of my favorite narrators of the canon. And as many of you probably remember, she played Miss Pebmarsh in the Agatha Christie's Poirot adaptation of The Clocks, as well as playing Agatha Christie herself in this great docudrama about Christie's life called Agatha Christie, A Life in Pictures. It was released in 2004, so a while ago, but I recently covered it on a Patreon episode, and it features Christie at different points in her life as a young girl, a middle-aged woman, and an older woman, and Anna Massey plays the older version of Christie, who's got attitude to spare. It's a spirited portrayal. Okay, so that's why Hugh Fraser was blocked from doing Murder in Mesopotamia. The second title is Death on the Nile, and this is one of a handful of titles that Sir David Suchet has voiced. So it seems that Hugh Fraser was pushed aside for Poirot himself. Oh, Hastings. Also, I should note that Kenneth Branagh voiced this book as a tie-in to his recent film adaptation of Death on the Nile. And while I'm not a huge fan of Branagh's film adaptation, I actually really love the voice work that he did with this book. It was one of the snippets that I included in my introduction to this episode. Okay, the third title that Hugh Fraser did not voice is Sad Cypress, which David Suchet also very interestingly voices. I wonder if he's simply fond of this title. It's sort of ironic to me since this is one of the Poirots that Christie herself lamented being forced to insert Poirot into. It really is a little bit of a mystery to me as to why David Suchet and not Hugh Fraser voices this one. So if anyone has any light to shed on the matter, please let me know. The fourth title is Evil Under the Sun, and once again, David Suchet has horned in on that one, that greedy Sir David. Evil Under the Sun is one of the crown jewels, so this one doesn't surprise me all that much. The fifth title is Dead Man's Folly, which is definitely not one of the crown jewels, certainly not in the All About Agatha rankings anyway. And yet, I remember distinctly that this was one of the final Poirot novels to be adapted within Agatha Christie's Poirot. So maybe they just thought that it was fitting that he voiced the novel as well. Or maybe Sir David felt sentimental toward Dead Man's Folly since it was one of the last books that he was involved in. I believe that the very last shot that they did for the program overall was actually a shot for Dead Man's Folly, even though Curtain, of course, was the last episode to air. And Curtain, naturally, had to be voiced by Hugh Fraser, since Captain Hastings makes his not-so-triumphant return as a first-person narrator in that final Poirot. So maybe Sir David just wanted to get in on the action there as he was wrapping up his time as Monsieur Poirot. Here is the beginning of Dead Man's Folly now, as voiced by Sir David Suchet. This is a bit of a long excerpt, but it's worth the time because it allows us to hear the full range of what he does as a voice artist. He narrates, he speaks as Monsieur Poirot in that immediately recognizable accent. He does both Miss Lemon and Ariadne Oliver here, dueling Mrs. Oliver voices. I love it. And he even does a phone operator as well. There's a lot going on here. Let's take a listen.
It was Miss Lemon, Poirot's efficient secretary, who took the telephone call. Laying aside her shorthand notebook, she raised the receiver and said, without emphasis, Trafalgar 8137. Hercule Poirot leaned back in his upright chair and closed his eyes. His fingers beat a meditative soft tattoo on the edge of the table. In his head he continued to compose the polished periods of the letter he had been dictating. Placing her hand over the receiver, Miss Lemon asked in a low voice, Will you accept a personal call from Nascombe, Devon? Poirot frowned. The place meant nothing to him. The name of the caller? He demanded cautiously. Miss Lemon spoke into the mouthpiece. Air raid? She asked doubtingly. Oh, yes. And what was the last name again? Once more she turned to Hercule Poirot. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver. Hercule Poirot's eyebrows shot up. A memory rose in his mind, windswept grey hair, an eagle profile. He rose and replaced Miss Lemon at the telephone. Hercule Poirot speaks, he announced grandiloquently. Is that Mr. Hercule Poirot speaking personally? The suspicious voice of the telephone operator demanded. Poirot assured her that that was the case. You're through to Mr. Poirot, said the voice. Its thin, reedy accents were replaced by a magnificent booming contralto, which caused Poirot hastily to shift the receiver a couple of inches further from his ear. Monsieur Poirot! Is that really you? Demanded Mrs. Oliver. Myself in person, madame. Well, this is Mrs. Oliver. I don't know if you remember me, but of course I remember you, madame. Who could forget you? Well, people do, sometimes, said Mrs. Oliver. Well, quite often, in fact. I don't think that I've got a very distinctive personality, or perhaps it's because I'm always doing different things to my hair, but all that's neither here nor there.
Just splendid. David Suchet is a talented man. And then real quick, the sixth Poirot title that Hugh Fraser does not voice is Murder on the Orient Express, which is another crown jewel, but I'm going to be dealing with that one at the end of my overview because it's a special situation in that we have 3 different major audiobook versions to choose from. And now a little more on our dear Hugh Fraser. Having voiced 27 Poirot titles, but 41 titles overall, this means that he has voiced 14 non-Poirot titles. 4 of them are the Tommy and Tuppence novels. And yes, he did also voice the Partners in Crime short story collection. So that means that poor Hugh Fraser has done God's work, voicing not only By the Pricking of My Thumbs, yes, I know a lot of you actually love that title, but the dreaded Postern of Fate. And you know what? He threw in Passenger to Frankfurt and The Secret of Chimneys as well, because he is just a stand-up guy like that. Though I'll note he did not do the Seven Dials mystery. I can't really blame him for abandoning Bundle and Company. So that's 6 of the 14 non-Poirots. And then among the other 8, I'd say there are 6 that a lot of people misremember as Poirots anyway. We've got Murder is Easy, Toward Zero, Sparkling Cyanide, Crooked House, Ordeal by Innocence, and The Pale Horse. So Mr. Fraser's voice is sure to keep that confusion going strong. And then the other 2 that he voiced are pretty fabulous. The aforementioned Sittaford Mystery, podcast favorite, and Endless Night, which means that Hugh Fraser gets to do voice work as Mike Rogers. Let's just listen to a little of that, shall we?
In my end is my beginning. That's a quotation I've often heard people say. It sounds all right. But what does it really mean? Is there ever any particular spot where one can put one's finger and say, it all began that day, at such a time and such a place, with such an incident? Did my story begin, perhaps, when I noticed the sale bill hanging on the wall of the George and Dragon, announcing sale by auction of that valuable property, the Towers?
Fantastic. Did you catch the slightly more working class inflected accent there? He definitely did not sound as posh as he does when he is using his regular narrator voice. And actually, that novel begins with a little epigraph, the William Blake poem in which the phrase Endless Night appears. And when Hugh Fraser reads out that poem, it's in his own posh voice. And then he becomes Mike Rogers. But I do like that it's subtle. You wouldn't want anything cartoonish in terms of accent. Well done, Hugh. I mean, he had to have some sort of a reward for suffering through The Secret of Chimneys, right? And then my last word on Hugh Fraser, but he really does deserve all the attention that I'm giving him here. He is clearly the MVP of this episode, but he also voiced a number of short story collections in addition to Partners in Crime. David Suchet voiced the complete short stories collection of Poirot, but it's good old Hugh Fraser who brings to life the Listerdale Mystery, Parker Pyne Investigates, and even The Mysterious Mr. Quinn. So thank you for all that you have done, Hugh Fraser. I know that so many of you are huge fans of his and listened to him all the time. I don't think I can overstate on this podcast how important Hugh Fraser is in the world of Christie audiobooks. And I actually feel bad that it is something that I have never said before on the podcast, because I know that Hugh Fraser's voice work is central to the enjoyment that so many of you get from Christie on a daily basis or near daily basis. So let's just acknowledge that. All right, I am going to move on now to Miss Marple, which is much more of a mixed bag in terms of voice artists, not as to quality. It's just that we've got a bunch of folks voicing the work in which our dear Aunt Jane is featured. So there are 12 full-length Miss Marple novels, and in her case, if you're dealing with a Miss Marple audiobook, there is a fair chance that Amelia Fox voiced it. Unless it's a Miss Marple novel narrated in the first person by a man, in which case Richard E. Grant definitely voiced it. So the actor Richard E. Grant did The Murder at the Vicarage and The Moving Finger, and that makes a lot of sense. You heard him in the guise of Leonard Clement at the beginning of this episode. How could I resist including an excerpt from my personal favorite Christie, The Murder at the Vicarage? Richard E. Grant is an actor I very much enjoy. He was nominated for an Oscar fairly recently for Can You Ever Forgive Me? That was such a great performance. And you may also remember him even more recently from Saltburn, the unhinged film Saltburn. He's just one of those English character actors who is excellent and has seemingly been in everything, including Gosford Park, and of course, Agatha Christie's Marple, where he played none other than Raymond West in a not-so-great adaptation of Nemesis, but it was not his fault whatsoever. He also did a documentary special that I've been meaning to watch for a while called Agatha and Poirot, Partners in Crime. And he is in the upcoming Thursday Murder Club. Very much our guy. Okay, so of the 10 remaining Miss Marples, Amelia Fox voiced 6 of them. A Murder is Announced, They Do It with Mirrors, 450 from Paddington, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, A Caribbean Mystery, and Nemesis. And I already referenced the Patreon episode in which Catherine and I discussed 4 adaptations of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, but I'm going to bring it up again because Amelia Fox stars in one of those adaptations as the unnamed first-person female narrator of that novel. It's the one from 1997, which also stars Charles Dance and Diana Rigg, and which I believe is the most faithful version to the text, and by many measures, the best adaptation, actually. And yes, I am including the Hitchcock film in that grouping. This is another fun fact, but Amelia Fox's mother is the actress Joanna David, who played the same role of the unnamed female first-person narrator, Maxim de Winter's unnamed second wife, in that 1979 adaptation of Rebecca, also starring Anna Massey and Jeremy Brett. Don't you love that? They kept it in the family. They're both very good in that role. I should also mention that Amelia Fox played Joanna Burton in the Agatha Christie's Marple adaptation of The Moving Finger. Just like Richard E. Grant, she is one of those character actors who is consistently top-notch and has just done a lot of great work. And I included an excerpt of her voicing Nemesis at the beginning of the episode. Okay, so we've got 4 Miss Marple titles left, right? Well, Richard E. Grant actually also did A Pocket Full of Rye, even though it is not narrated from a first-person male perspective. And then the actor Stephanie Cole voiced the other 3, The Body in the Library, At Bertram's Hotel, and Sleeping Murder. Okay, so Stephanie Cole is actually not someone I had heard of before, but I'm guessing that she is familiar to British listeners out there. And when I looked her up, her face was definitely familiar to me, if not her name. She was fairly recently on Coronation Street, actually, but she might be best known for starring in Tanko in the 1980s. And forgive me this tangent, but when I saw the name of that program as I was just looking into Stephanie Cole, my first thought had to do with Joan Didion, who talked about watching that show in the afternoon with her husband after they would put in a day's worth of writing work. It was just a really popular masterpiece theater-y show in the 1980s. And I remember coming across that reference to Tanko when I was researching Joan Didion for that 1970s Los Angeles map that I helped Catherine finish. Anyway, I should also mention that Stephanie Cole was in Agatha Christie's Poirot, because of course she was. She was in The Theft of the Royal Ruby, aka The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding, in which she played Mrs. Lacey. here she is voicing the opening to The Body in the Library, because how could I pass up the opportunity to excerpt from the beginning of that novel? You may have noticed, by the way, that these excerpts tend to be from the beginnings of the books. That is for the very simple reason that there are free previews of these books provided online, which are always from the first couple of minutes of each book. And I did not want to have to purchase every single audiobook that I excerpted from. Figure I may as well be transparent about that. Okay, here's the fabulous Stephanie Cole voicing the equally fabulous opening to The Body in the Library.
Mrs. Bantry was dreaming. Her sweet peas had just taken a first at the flower show. The vicar, dressed in cassock and surplice, was giving out the prizes in church. His wife wandered past, dressed in a bathing suit. But as is the blessed habit of dreams, this fact did not arouse the disapproval of the parish in the way it would assuredly have done in real life. Mrs. Bantry was enjoying her dream a good deal. She usually did enjoy these early morning dreams that were terminated by the arrival of early morning tea. Somewhere in her inner consciousness was an awareness of the usual early morning noises of the household, the rattle of the curtain rings on the stairs as the housemaid drew them, the noises of the second housemaid's dustpan and brush in the passage outside. In the distance, the heavy noise of the front door bolt being drawn back. Another day was beginning. In the meantime, she must extract as much pleasure as possible from the flower show, for already its dreamlike quality was becoming apparent. Below her was the noise of the big wooden shutters in the drawing-room being opened. She heard it, yet did not hear it. For quite half an hour longer, the usual household noises would go on, discreet, subdued, not disturbing because they were so familiar. They would culminate in a swift, controlled sound of footsteps along the passage, the rustle of a print dress, the subdued chink of tea things as the tray was deposited on the table outside, then the soft knock and the entry of Mary to draw the curtains. In her sleep, Mrs. Bantry frowned. Something disturbing was penetrating through to the dream state, something out of its time. Footsteps along the passage, footsteps that were too hurried and too soon. Her ears listened unconsciously for the chink of china, but there was no chink of china. The knock came at the door. Automatically, from the depths of her dreams, Mrs. Bantry said, "Come in." The door opened. Now there would be the chink of curtain rings as the curtains were drawn back. But there was no chink of curtain rings. Out of the dim green light, Mary's voice came, breathless, hysterical. Oh, ma'am, there's a body in the library."
Hooray for Stephanie Cole. And you would think that that would be the end of my very quick overview of the major voicings of the Miss Marple novels. But wait, as mentioned by that listener who wrote into me, Joan Hickson herself recorded audiobook versions of nearly all the Miss Marple novels and even some of the short stories. She does not seem to have voiced The Body in the Library, At Bertram's Hotel, and Sleeping Murder, and I believe that's why Stephanie Cole did those versions. But she has voiced all the others, and I'd just like to give you a taste now of Joan Hickson voicing one of these Miss Marple novels. This is the beginning of A Pocket Full of Rye, so here goes.
It was Miss Summers' turn to make the tea. Miss Summers was the newest and the most inefficient of the typists. She was no longer young and had a mild, worried face like a sheep. The kettle was not quite boiling when Miss Summers poured the water onto the tea, but poor Miss Summers was never quite sure when a kettle was boiling. It was one of the many worries that afflicted her in life. She poured out the tea and took the cups round with a couple of limp, sweet biscuits in each saucer. Miss Griffith, the efficient head typist, a grey-haired martinet who had been with the Consolidated Investments Trust for 16 years, said sharply, "Water not boiling again, Summers." And Miss Summers' worried, meek face went pink, and she said, "Oh dear, I did think it was boiling this time."
Okay, two thoughts. The first is that I have gotten a lot of messages from you listeners in response to my episode with listener Helen Frank about the fictional secretaries of Agatha Christie. There were a couple of favorite secretaries and favorite secretary passages that we missed, which you pointed out, and I will speak about them at a later date. But no one mentioned this opening to A Pocket Full of Rye, which I think I did reference in passing on that episode. Either Helen or I did, but it really is a great secretarial passage, isn't it? So there's that. But then I just want to bring up that email from a listener that I read out at the beginning of this episode, because that listener mentioned that they listened to David Suchet and Joan Hickson audiobooks, but that their voices are a lot more rushed when they're doing their voice work compared to what they're doing in the TV adaptations. I didn't necessarily find that to be the case in terms of what I heard of David Suchet's voice work, but I've heard very little. My sample size is small, so I will take the listener at her word where David Suchet is concerned, but I certainly could hear what she meant as to Joan Hickson immediately upon listening to this excerpt. It is much more rushed than the way Joan Hickson delivers her lines as Miss Marple in the BBC series. That's for sure. I'm not sure if it totally works for me. Amelia Fox has a lovely voice, and I know people really love those Stephanie Cole versions as well. So again, just an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the audiobook format in the world of Agatha Christie. I should also mention that the collection of new Miss Marple short stories, the continuation stories written by authors other than Agatha Christie, of course, has its own audiobook format. And in this case, each of the stories was read out by a different female voice artist, which is so fantastic. We've got people like Alison Steadman, Celia Imrie, Miriam Margolyes. I think that was a really fun choice. I love that. And while I'm on the subject of continuation novels, there is a separate voice artist for the Sophie Hannah Poirots. And this makes a lot of sense, since those novels are all narrated from the first-person male perspective of a character who Sophie created, Inspector Edward Catchpool. The actor Julian Rind-Tutt voices all of those novels, and he is another character actor who's got a Christie pedigree of his own. He played Michael Garfield in the Agatha Christie's Poirot adaptation of Halloween Party, and he also appeared in Agatha Christie's Marple as Arthur Calgary in that show's Marpleized version of Ordeal by Innocence. Okay, back to Amelia Fox for a moment, because I also want to give her her due, as she, like Hugh Fraser, has done her own fair share of God's work, voicing certain non-Miss Marple titles, many of which are, shall we say, not the most celebrated, even though they are all beloved, of course. These are The Man in the Brown Suit, The Seven Dials Mystery, Why Didn't They Ask Evans, Death Comes as the End, They Came to Baghdad, and Destination Unknown. And I will pluck out The Man in the Brown Suit from those titles because, for one, it is by far my favorite title among all those. But it's also the other Christie, in addition to Murder in Mesopotamia, that features a first-person female narrator, not for the entire book, but for much of it. So it's fun that Amelia Fox gets to be Anne Bedingfeld when she voices that book. That means that Amelia Fox has voiced 12 novels overall, and between the two of them, Hugh Fraser and Amelia Fox, have voiced a whopping 53 full-length Agatha Christie titles. 53 of 66. That is huge. If I were awarding medals here for voice artists, Hugh Fraser would get the gold, and Amelia Fox would get the silver. No question. Oh, and the last thing I'll mention as to Miss Marple titles is that the actor Juliet Stevenson voices the complete short stories of Miss Marple. And in a funny way, this is really fitting because she also appeared in the Agatha Christie's Marple episode of Ordeal by Innocence, playing Gwenda Vaughn alongside Arthur Calgary, played by Julian Rind-Tutt, as well as Alison Steadman playing Kirsten Lindstrom, actually. I mean, look hard enough and you'll find these voice artists all over the place in any Agatha Christie adaptation, since these are exactly the sorts of character actors who tend to do this sort of work for audiobooks, and I'm so glad that they do. All right, I have a few more odds and ends in my very broad overview of these audiobooks of Agatha Christie. There are a ton of sanctioned alternate versions of many of these books. The ones I just went through, the ones read for the most part by Hugh Fraser and Amelia Fox and a few others, are the sort of standard versions, but I do want to recognize that we have alternate versions as well. Audiobooks like Murder is Easy, voiced by the actor Gemma Whelan of Game of Thrones fame. I'm not sure about this, but this seems to be a tie-in with the recent television adaptation of that title. And that makes sense that whenever there's a new adaptation on film or TV of one of these titles, that they might want to do a freshened version of the audiobook, especially because it's not like these alternate versions replace the ones that came before it. They really do feel additive to me in a wonderful way. There are a few more alternate versions I wanted to shout out, and I am getting these from the website everythingagatha.com, which has a nice page all about audiobook offerings. I'll include a link to that website in the show notes. Nigel Hawthorne voiced The Murder in the Mews. Isla Blair voiced While the Light Lasts, that outlier of a collection. And then Fenella Woolgar voiced The Last Seance, which is a more recent collection of spooky, supernatural Christie short stories. I already mentioned Kenneth Branagh voicing Death on the Nile. He also voiced Murder on the Orient Express. That was the first of his big film adaptations that he did in recent years. But I thought it was interesting that he did not voice Halloween Party. Wah, wah. That makes sense, since A Haunting in Venice is nearly unrecognizable as an adaptation of Halloween Party. So an audiobook tie-in is fairly pointless. And I never really did a full rundown of the audiobooks voiced by David Suchet, since I was rightly focused on the work of Hugh Fraser when it comes to the Poirot novels. But Sir David has done some significant work here when it comes to Poirot novels. So he has voiced Dead Man's Folly, Sad Cypress, Evil Under the Sun, Death on the Nile. I mentioned all of those, as well as all of the Poirot short stories. And then he also voiced Murder on the Orient Express. So once again, just as in the case of Death on the Nile, we have a book voiced by both David Suchet and Kenneth Branagh. But we also have a third version. So let's talk about Dan Stevens for a second. Dan Matthew Crawley Stevens, for all those Downton Abbey fans out there. He is a very literary fellow, very erudite, and he seems to be the actor who gets trotted out when Christie's publishers want to do something fancy in the audio sphere. Dan Stevens voiced both Murder on the Orient Express and Then There Were None. Well, la-dee-da. This is what I was getting at earlier in the episode when I mentioned that Murder on the Orient Express is a little bit of a special situation. I would say Murder on the Orient Express is definitely the title with the most high-profile voices providing alternate versions. We've got the Dan Stevens version, the David Suchet version, and the Kenneth Branagh version. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Given that it's such a prestige title with significant cinematic tie-ins. And you know what? Let's make hay out of this abundance and have a voice-off right now. The podcast format really lends itself to sampling these audiobooks. So let's listen in quick succession from an excerpt in the first scene of the novel, which gives us an opportunity to see what these three gentlemen do in terms of both voice work and accent. Let's start with David Suchet first.
Dubosc had overheard part of a conversation between him and the stranger. You have saved us, mon cher, said the general emotionally, his great white moustache trembling as he spoke. You have saved the honor of the French army. You have averted much bloodshed. How can I thank you for acceding to my request, to have come so far? To which the stranger, by name Monsieur Hercule Poirot, had made a fitting reply, including the phrase, "Oh, but indeed, do I not remember that once you saved my life?" And then the general had made another fitting reply to that, disclaiming any merit for that past service, and with more mention of France, of Belgium, of glory, of honour, and of such kindred things, they had embraced each other heartily, and the conversation had ended. As to what it had all been about, Lieutenant Dubosc was still in the dark, but to him had been delegated the duty of seeing off Monsieur Poirot by the Taurus Express, and he was carrying it out with all the zeal and ardour befitting a young officer with a promising career ahead of him.
Okay, now let's jump from one night to another, from Sir David to Sir Kenneth Branagh.
Dubosc had overheard part of a conversation between him and the stranger. "You have saved us, mon cher," said the general emotionally, his great white moustache trembling as he spoke. "You have saved the honor of the French army.
You have averted much bloodshed. How can I thank you for acceding to my request to have come so far? To which the stranger, by name Monsieur Hercule Poirot, had made a fitting reply, including the phrase, "But indeed do I not remember that once you saved my life?" And then the General had made another fitting reply to that, disclaiming any merit for that past service, and with more mention of France, of Belgium, of glory, of honour, and of such kindred things, they had embraced each other heartily, and the conversation had ended. As to what it had all been about, Lieutenant de Bosch was still in the dark, but to him had been delegated the duty of seeing off Monsieur Poirot by the Taurus Express, and he was carrying it out with all the zeal and ardour befitting a young officer with a promising career ahead of him.
Okay, and now here is Dan Stevens. Not yet a knight, but he's young. He's got some time.
Dubois had overheard part of a conversation between him and the stranger. "You have saved us, mon cher," said the general emotionally, his great white moustache trembling as he spoke. "You have saved the honor of the French army. You have averted much bloodshed. How can I thank you for acceding to my request, to have come so far?" To which the stranger, by name Monsieur Hercule Poirot, had made a fitting reply, including the phrase, "But indeed, do I not remember that once you saved my life?" And then the general had made another fitting reply to that, disclaiming any merit for that past service, and with more mention of France, of Belgium, of glory, of honour, and of such kindred things, they had embraced each other heartily, and the conversation had ended. As to what it had all been about, Lieutenant Dubois was still in the dark, but to him had been delegated the duty of seeing off Monsieur Poirot by the Taurus Express, and he was carrying it out with all the zeal and ardour befitting a young officer with a promising career ahead of him.
Okay, I have a few comments. First, I'm so pleased to see that I am not the only one with pronunciational difficulties when it comes to proper nouns. Did you catch that David Suchet said Dubosc, and then Kenneth Branagh and Dan Stevens said Dubosch? The name is spelled D-U-B-O-S-C. I'm not really sure who is correct, but I love that someone seems to be wrong. If I had had to predict before listening to those three segments back to back to back, whose I would like the most, I probably would have said either David Suchet or Kenneth Branagh because they are both such great actors. But probably my biggest takeaway from this little exercise is that when it comes to voicing an audiobook, I think that less sometimes is more. Dan Stevens, in addition to having one of the velvetiest voices in the biz, his voice is very easy on the ears. He has a sort of subtle, low-key way of putting on different accents that I think wears really well when you have to listen to one of these voice artists for hours on end. So I have a feeling that's why he is as valued as he is, compared to the more dramatic renditions that we get from David Suchet and Kenneth Branagh, which I still really loved. I mean, I would listen to them for hours on end as well. Is it a cop-out to say I loved all three? I don't think so. I'm going to say it. I loved all three. And I'm so happy that each of these actors has read out the entirety of this Christie crown jewel. But you know what? I still wish Hugh Fraser had gotten to voice Murder on the Orient Express as well. Justice for Hugh. I haven't mentioned the Mary Westmacott novels at all on this episode. And you know what is interesting, listeners, about the audiobook format for the Westmacotts? Each of those books is voiced by a different person. Every single one of them. And I did not recognize any of the names of the voice artists involved in those books, though I'm sure they're all talented actors with worthy voices. I think this is just telling of the way that the Westmacott novels have been siloed or cordoned off from the main Agatha Christie content. Maybe they will get spiffed up in the audio sector in the future. Just a thought. And then finally, and in a way I'm saving the best for last here, there is another outlier collection of short stories that I haven't mentioned yet, which is The Hound of Death. Many of the stories in that collection would be subsequently collected in The Last Seance, which I just mentioned is voiced by Fenella Woolgar. But there is a different actor who voices The Hound of Death. And do you know who it is? Oh, this is so good. It's Christopher Lee. Dracula and Saruman himself. This is so perfect. Let's take a quick listen. This is an excerpt from the end of The Last Seance, which basically reads like a Hammer horror flick, even without Christopher Lee's voice, but with his voice. Oh boy. And this is the one excerpt I will warn listeners out there is slightly spoilery. So if you are concerned about being spoiled for The Last Seance, you might want to skip ahead a few minutes. Okay, here goes.
The materialization came hesitatingly through the curtains. It was a child. She stood there, her arms held out.
Maman!
Ah! cried Madame X. Again she half rose from her seat. Madame! cried Raoul, alarmed. The medium! I must touch her! cried Madame X hoarsely. She moved a step forward. For God's sake, Madame, control yourself! cried Raoul. He was really alarmed now. Sit down at once! My little one, I must touch her! Madame, I command you! Sit down! He was writhing desperately in his bonds, but Madame X had done her work well. He was helpless. A terrible sense of impending disaster swept over him. In the name of God, Madame, sit down, he shouted. Remember the medium! Madame X turned on him with a harsh laugh. What do I care for your medium? She cried. I want my child. You are mad! My child, I tell you, mine, my own flesh and blood, my own little one come back to me from the dead, alive and breathing. Raoul opened his lips, but no words would come. She was terrible, this woman, remorseless, savage, absorbed by her own passion. The baby lips parted, and for the third time the word echoed, Maman! Come then, my little one, cried Madame X. With a sharp gesture she caught up the child in her arms. From behind the curtains came a long-drawn scream of utter anguish. Simon! cried Raoul. Simon! He was aware vaguely of Madame X rushing past him, of the unlocking of the door, of the retreating footsteps down the stairs. From behind the curtains there still sounded the terrible high, long-drawn scream. Such a scream as Raoul had never heard. It died away with a horrible kind of gurgle. Then there came the thud of a body falling.
Oh, I love his voice. We still have a story or two to cover from that collection on the podcast, actually, so I'm definitely going to have to listen to Christopher Lee's rich, round, resonant, and deadly voice when we cover those stories. I can't wait. All right, we are at an end of my overview of the audiobooks of Agatha Christie, which means that it is almost time to turn to my conversation with Gray. And even though I have touched on so many different voice artists, Hugh Fraser, Amelia Fox, Sir David Suchet and Joan Hickson themselves, Richard E. Grant, Anna Massey, Stephanie Cole, Dan Stevens, Kenneth Branagh, etc., there is one significant voice I have yet to mention. And that is the voice of Agatha Christie. And yes, this is where I'm going to bring up the dreaded issue of AI, because recent advances in technology have made it possible to replicate authors' voices so long as they exist on recordings, and Agatha Christie's voice certainly exists on many recordings. AI now makes it possible to synthesize a quote-unquote recording of these long-gone authors reading their own texts. This is something that we see Uncanny Valley Agatha Christie do in that BBC Maestro course, which I spoke about with Dr. Mark Aldridge on a recent episode. And you can bet that there is a push to sell audiobooks read out by their own authors, especially authors of such stature as Dame Agatha Christie. This is not something that I have seen or heard yet, but I have to imagine it's coming. And you know what? I'm going to use this as a segue into my interview with Gray, because I asked him about this, but I would also love for you all to think on that and let me know how you feel about potential future audiobooks voiced by Agatha Christie herself. Would you be all over Agatha Christie reading her own work to you? Do you find it totally creepy? Let me know. Send me an email, allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You have listened to my monologuing for long enough now. let's officially move on to the interview. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
What a joy it is to be joined now by Gray Robert Brown, who many of you know as the co-host of The Swinging Christies, the podcast all about Agatha Christie in the swinging 60s, which is a project Gray has been doing for a year and a half now. I can't believe it's already been a year and a half with our mutual good friend, Dr. Mark Aldridge. I actually just learned this as I was doing a little research for purposes of this very intro, but it was in 2022 that Mark and Gray met when Gray presented a paper titled Famous Last Words, Agatha Christie's Curtain and Sleeping Murder at the Golden Age of Crime conference at Bournemouth University. That is the more academically oriented meeting of agathologists that takes place, if not every year, then most years, and which I have attended twice now. First in 2017 with my late co-host Catherine Brobeck, and then in 2023, which is where I met Gray. I will be attending this year's conference as well, just a few days before the Agatha Christie Festival in September, so hope there are some of you out there who are planning to attend. I look forward to seeing you. Gray has been fascinated by Agatha Christie since childhood and grew up a mere 8 miles from her former home in Wallingford. And Gray and Mark appeared on a crossover episode of this podcast last year, which we recorded at the Agatha Christie Festival, and in which we three ranked the novels of Agatha Christie from the 1960s, or at least had a rollicking good debate about what the ranking of those novels should be. So we know that Gray is a podcaster, but he is also a writer. As a playwright, he has appeared on long and short lists for the Old Vic New Voices 12, the Papa Tango Prize, the Theatre 503 International Playwriting Prize, Bold Playwrights, the Oxford Playhouse Playmaker, and the Traverse Theatre Breakthrough Scheme. His plays have received rehearsed readings at the Southwark Playhouse, the Old Red Lion, and the Place, Bedford. His stage play Sugar is in development as a TV sitcom, and he contributed a story for the Ladybird Stories for Pride audio collection for children in 2024. And ding, 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 did you hear the key word just then? Audio. The reason that Gray is here today, in addition to being just generally excellent company, is that he has a ton of experience in the world of audiobooks since his day job, so to speak, the thing he does when he's not writing or researching obscure aspects of Agatha Christie or answering emails from the likes of Michelle Kasmer and Brad Friedman. His day job is making and casting audiobooks for Penguin Random House. And that means that I have a lot of questions for him today. Welcome, Gray.
Thank you so much. You promised me a bombastic introduction, and you certainly delivered. I'm very flattered. It's always lovely to talk to you, especially because, and I'm going to return some of your kind words now, but I've said to you before, you are the king of Agatha Christie podcasting, and you and Catherine inspired Mark and I so much. I think you've got something stupid like 270 episodes under your belt at this point, and we're proud of our mere 20. So yeah, it's always nice to chat.
You know, it's the quality that counts, not the quantity. Although I would like to think that, as in the case of Agatha Christie herself, you can have both, right? You can have quantity and quality.
And you do. I mean, I think I'm on my fifth or maybe even sixth full listen through All About Agatha now. I'm one of those people I'm one of those very annoying people, I'm sure, that will say to you things like, but I remember in the Ordeal by Innocence episode when you said this.
Yes, keeping us honest. That is wow, fifth or sixth. I don't know if I've listened to them that many times. Actually, I'm sure that I have with editing, but that's very lovely. Thank you. So your day job, as I said, is to make and cast audiobooks at Penguin Random House, which is a major publisher. I would love to know what this means precisely. What I'd really love is to get some sort of an insider's view of how an audiobook is produced, because it's all a bit of a mystery to me. And I think there are a lot of people who would be very curious to hear what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit of a mystery. I think probably because it's a subsection of the industry, as you said when we were corresponding, that slightly came out of nowhere in terms of the sheer prominence that it has right now. You know, the job that I do probably didn't really exist 15 years ago, which is a weird thing to think. And we move so fast and change so much. But also it's this... Because of that, the kind of terminology around what we do. So, for example, for Penguin Random House Audio UK, I'm in the editorial team, but editorial is a bit of a misnomer because it's based on publishing terminology, but we don't sound edit and we don't edit as in line edit the books like your print editor does. So what I do, that's what I don't do. What I do is I put it as make and cast. It's basically we take what all of the Penguin imprints in the UK are publishing coming up, and we make hopefully very high quality, unabridged audio format versions of them ready to publish simultaneously with the other lead format. So usually the hardback, sometimes the paperback, and almost always the ebook. So my role in particular, we like to think of it as deciding on the production approach, which is a bit more broad than casting, because sometimes you might cast the author. As you're probably aware, a lot of authoritative kind of non-fiction in particular is read by the author themselves.
Yep.
That's something that listeners tell me all the time they really like. So it's not always a case of shortlisting actors, although that is a lot of it, and especially for fiction, that's a lot of what I do. But production approach in terms of very much being led by the text and going, okay, so taking into account the preferences from the print editor of this book and the author of this book, it's about transferring what's on the page into a new format rather than kind of reimagining or reinterpreting it. And does this need sound effects? Does this call out for music? Does this call out for 3 voices or 2 voices due to the perspectives in the book? You know, all those questions. And essentially then project managing the audiobook internally. So the nitty gritty of when it's going to happen. When can we record? When are the studios free? When is final text ready? Because you can't do anything until the text is final, because obviously that's what they're reading and it needs to match. And being a kind of ambassador for the title. That's a very potted way of putting it, hopefully not too unclear, but
no, that's very clear. And it brings up what in some ways is probably my major question for you. And it sounds like this is something that you grapple with regularly. And of course you do, which is when you are, as you said, you're taking a text and you're making an audio version of that. But there are so many different things that you can do. There are so many different directions in which you can go when you're engaging in that production process. You could just have one person, you could engage one actor or the author, him or herself or whatever, to sit down in a studio with a microphone in front of them and read every word. And that's it. And have no sound effects, have no music, not engage multiple people. And I imagine that's sort of the simplest version, but you don't always do that, right? Sometimes you do add sound effects and sometimes you do employ multiple. Do you call them voice actors? Because I don't want to say narrators because they're not, because that's confusing because that's something very specific within the context of a story, but I don't really want to say actor either. What is the term that you use for them when they're providing this role? Voice actors?
Yeah, I would tend to say voice actors, although I'm not against the word narrator, to be fair. But yeah, I would tend to say voice actors just because I know some incredibly talented voice actors that are slightly self-deprecating about what it is that they actually do in the booth. And I very much, I mean, it is acting. It's a performance, and it's a really acquired skill. And I think, yeah, narrator, I don't know, there's almost an implication in that word that what they're doing is quite straightforward and it's anything but.
Agreed. I think that's probably why narrator doesn't sound quite right to me. But obviously, this can be taken really far, and it's something that I already discussed earlier in the episode, which was my surprise upon listening to The Mysterious Affair at Styles, this new audio version of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, starring Peter Dinklage as Monsieur Poirot, which came out recently and was in some ways the immediate catalyst for doing this episode because it made such a splash, and it was such a big thing when it came out. In a wonderful way. Like I loved seeing all the excitement around this, and it's quite good for what it is, but I don't think it's an audiobook. I think it's a radio play. It's very much adapted the text. So the text is not being read out. We do not get Hastings's voice, and it's an adaptation. You know, the actual story itself is being adapted, and we have multiple actors. We have a different actor for every role. We have lots of music cues. We have lots of sound effects. And to me, it's pretty much exactly what we get when we listen to John Moffat playing Poirot on BBC Radio or June Whitfield playing Miss Marple. And, you know, Audible is not necessarily calling it an audiobook. Like I did then once I realized that, I kind of looked back at the packaging and it says an original Audible production. So, you know, I'm not even necessarily taking issue with them, but I was just surprised by how fuzzy the line can be, I think, between audiobook and something else. So I would just love your thoughts on that and how you kind of negotiate that and just like what the decision-making process is like.
Yeah, definitely. You're absolutely right to identify that fuzziness. I think a lot of that comes from, well, it's a few things. One is that in this particular example, Audible is both a retailer, a platform, so you can purchase or listen to books that I make from Penguin, but they're also increasingly producing, which is part of their offering.
Right.
Partly Spotify entering the market in the UK about 3 years ago. I'm not sure about the US side, but entering the audiobook market in a big way about 3 years ago in the UK meant that all platforms are kind of stepping up their original offering because that's what will attract people to the platform. And I guess Audible think that the way to do that is with, like you say, these kind of splashy, big name, big cast adaptations, which, you know, it works. I can see the logic in that. The other reason why the line is a bit fuzzy is many years ago when audiobooks were somewhat in their infancy compared to what we think of them now, they were almost always abridged. And the reason for that was mostly, I think I'm right in saying, born out of the fact that the main way that people would experience audiobooks, well, and originally the only way, is by buying a CD or a tape cassette. And CDs were, and to some extent still are, very limited in terms of how many minutes you can physically squeeze onto them.
Sure.
And as a result, the decision was taken, rather than buying these unwieldy massive box sets, to really kind of, you know, get to the heart of what a text is. And that's more or less what BBC Sounds still do to this day. Again, in the UK, I'm not sure how internationally available they are, but they will do books at bedtime and what they call audiobooks. But to us, they're abridgments, which is not what we do anymore. We almost always, in fact, I would go as far as to say always, deliver a purposefully verbatim product now, because the idea is delivering the book, like I say, kind of transferred to a different format. Where the line is then fuzzy with regards to that, because as you identified, the Audible Styles is not just, it's a full cast adaptation. It's not just an abridged version because there's all the production and all the rest of it. Is what if I get assigned a text, as I do regularly, which is, for example, a thriller where there are snippets of transcript or snippets of interviews or descriptions of dream sequences or sounds, things that if you transfer them to life, for want of a better phrase, in the audio sphere, then you are by definition adapting or doing, giving the trappings of adaptation, which is sound effects and music, or multi-voice, as you identified as well. So I think that's where the line gets blurred slightly, is we've made quite a few titles over the years. True Crime Story by Joseph Knox springs to mind as one, where they very much sound like radio plays, but they are actually unabridged from the text. And increasingly, as we are all feeling very drained by the wider world and looking to, escapism and entertainment, I think audiobooks will continue to move in that direction of certainly, like I say, applying the trappings of adaptations to some degree.
That's interesting. I mean, it strikes me that there's a bright line and a fuzzy line. The bright line for you, and I'm glad to hear it, is that you have to recreate the text word for word, right? It's a verbatim kind of recreation in audio format of the text that exists on the page, but that doesn't mean that you can't do more. You can't have, as you say, the trappings of radio or other audio sort of adaptations, so that you can add sound effects, you can add music, you can have different people reading out different parts, so it's that much easier to imagine that it's different people speaking. And obviously, even if you just have one person speaking, they can throw their voice, right? Or they can do different accents, they can alter the pitch or the timbre of their voice. And I love when people do that. I was actually noting earlier in this episode, I've gone on record that I'm not a huge fan of the Kenneth Branagh adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile and Halloween Party. But for this episode, I listened to a good chunk of Kenneth Branagh reading Death on the Nile. And from the very beginning, it's great because he puts on these different accents and he's got such a rich voice. And, it's Kenneth Branagh, like, Mr. Shakespeare himself. Like, of course he's really good at that. And I love that he was willing to lend his superlative actor chops to reading out the full text, including the dedication and, every single word of Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile. So like, that's all really great. But I do feel like it kind of starts with recreating the text verbatim. And I guess that's just why I was surprised by what Audible did, because for me, when I think Audible, I think audiobook, which I'm sure they like, but the distinction between an Audible production or, an original Audible production that is not quite an audiobook versus the many, many audiobooks that they put out, that's where, I think there's a slight danger in there, just because I think someone could easily listen to the Audible original Mysterious Affair at Styles and think, oh, that's what Agatha Christie wrote. And it's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Penguin Audio have the tender for BBC licensed titles on audio retailers. So a subsection of my team are responsible for, as you mentioned earlier, the John Moffat and the June Whitfield titles being available on, places like Audible and Spotify. And they do amazing work curating that list, sort of picking through the BBC archives and finding these radio gems that can be packaged up and offered to, for example, the Audible customer in exchange for their monthly credit. And, those are also, as you say, they're radio plays, they're adaptations, and they're available to purchase alongside, say, a straight reading of Poston of Fate by Hugh Fraser, which is what I've just started listening to. Ooh. I'm sure you'll be thrilled to hear.
He's fantastic, by the way. I mean, I did not realize the extent to which he has read so many or voiced so many of these Agatha Christie novels. But he's great. His Poirot is great too. I mean, listening to Hugh Fraser do Poirot is a little weird at first, but he's quite good. And it's such a velvety voice.
Yeah, and that's a great example of, obviously that's TV tie-in casting, which is something that we look to do where appropriate, as is the Kenneth Branagh casting. Him reading Death on the Nile is obviously a movie tie-in situation, and that brings over listeners, and it can bring over PR, but it's also a really interesting and lovely creative choice, because for me, I'm going, this is fascinating because Hugh Fraser has that Christie-ishness. Obviously, he occupies that world for us and that nostalgia for those of us that grew up watching him. but he's reading a Tommy and Tuppence. And for me, I listen, and one of the amazing things about audiobook listening is that, you know, you can let your mind wander, and that's part of the fun, and don't ever let anyone tell you that it's not part of the fun or it's not reading. And I sort of sit there and I think, oh yeah, I mean, is there a parallel world where Hugh Fraser played Tommy, and how similar are Tommy and Hastings actually, and how do they differ? I mean, they differ because Hastings isn't a complete waste of space, but I should also say, I mean, this isn't also to denigrate the kind of straight read, as we would call it, the non-adapted, non-abridged. You know, that is the bread and butter of publishing and the audiobook industry. And not because it's easy or because it's cheap, but because a lot of books just don't need, in terms of bringing them to life in the audio sphere, what they need is a team that really cares about the book, aka me, and I do, because that's what I'm like. An actor that's brilliant, which obviously those are who we choose, those are who come in, one that preps and really cares, and a producer that's brilliant. And my God, do we have loads of those at Penguin Random House UK, which I'm very, very pleased to report. So, you know, take, for example, it's Eva Kaminsky. Is it Eva Kaminsky who reads
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Who reads my books, yes.
Excellent casting for your ghostwriter character. It wouldn't make sense to have a second reader in there because it's all from her perspective.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't make sense to cast a man because you're a man, because it's from her first person perspective, isn't it? Remind me.
It is indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Of course it is. Yeah. And it would be a lesser version of the story, in fact, if it were peppered with distracting, you know, I'm imagining, I don't know, clips of Hillary Clinton or something throughout the first one.
It's absolutely true. Although, well, this is really funny since you brought it up. Since you brought up my books, which I was not going to bring up, really talking about how rarely I talk about myself as a writer on this podcast, and now, of course, after saying that, it's happening in every episode. But
no, well, I've been trained by Mark, you see, to be, because I'm Mark's soul.
You're his hype man. You're his hype man. You're like, Agatha Christie's Marple, expert on wickedness. I just happened to be reading it and learned this fun fact. As he's prodding you, he probably has his little Mark author prod as you're recording. No,
I'm black and blue. He kicks me under the recording table.
But I have in the third book, actually, in the series, which is not out yet. At one point, I describe a piece of music, and I make a lot of it. And because it's been very eye-opening how many people have responded so favorably to the audiobook version. And it just made me realize, just as an author, anecdotally, how many people actually listen to audiobooks. And I didn't really realize it. You know, it accounts for approximately 10% of book sales overall worldwide. And I'm sure that varies very much depending on territories, but that is huge. And then the revenue generated by audiobook sales has increased year over year very steadily, also at about 10%. So each year growing, the revenue growing by 10%. So it's really just a very healthy slice of the pie of book sales overall. And I started thinking about audiobooks, and I was thinking to myself, should I make a note that maybe that piece of music should be piped in at that point? Like, is that something that you would potentially do?
It's definitely a conversation we'd have. And do you know what? One of my favorite parts of the job is having a conversation like that with an author who's engaged with the audio format and is excited by what it offers. And you could go, oh, you know, what if you, obviously there are all sorts of boring practical questions like rights and money and things like that. But, you know, I would go, oh, you know, could you maybe lay it over the intro as well, almost to tip off the listener that it's coming, or would that spoil the surprise? And actually you could lay it over the outro as well, and then when the listener hears it for the second time over the end credits, they're reminded of the kind of
that moment,
I'm sure, ingenious way that you've wrapped up the plot by that point in a way that all comes back to the music, and it's a crucial clue, or I don't know, I'm guessing.
I mean, and that's really fun. I mean, I think that is probably where, I'm sure that's where things are headed, where people who are actually creating the books are thinking about what the audio version is going to sound like. And
definitely,
I think that's all wonderful. I mean, I also feel like you have given two pretty good reasons for why audiobooks are as robust a business as they are these days, one of which I already knew, the other of which I had no idea until talking to you. So I'll start with that one, which is just your point about technology, because you're so right. I remember the olden days of CDs, of those books on CD, and they would often come in like folders because you had to have multiple CDs. And it just makes sense that, of course, they would abridge and do whatever they could to keep those to a minimum, because it was just awkward. I mean, it was just the physicality of it was very awkward. And we're all on our devices all the time now. It's very elegant. Like, I think audiobooks, when you play them on, you know, whatever your smartphone is, if you have a smartphone, or even on your laptop or tablet, or, you know, there are a lot of options. And I think there's an ease to that. It lends itself to the format. And that's something that has really changed over the last 15 years. So that's one thing. And then you made reference to the fact that there's a lot going on in the world. And, one of the reasons people turn to books is for escapism. It's not the only reason, but that, the entertainment value, I think, of audiobooks only enhances that aspect. Like, there's a little bit of the same reason, I think, why people turn to audiobooks that they turn to films and television programs, and also why they turn to books in print. So that's all kind of being enhanced. I'm curious if you have any other thoughts as to why it has grown as much as it has, and why it seems that it will persist and probably only grow ever larger.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to identify those two main reasons. I mean, you make reference to the fact that it's so easy that it's kind of on our devices now, and we're on them all the time. And it's the word accessibility, and meaning that in multiple ways as well. One of the things that I'm super passionate about, or one of the reasons why I'm super passionate about audiobooks, is because they are a properly accessible route to storytelling for all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life, for many of whom print books just are not. And that can be anything from, I don't know, being brought up in the kind of background where you wouldn't go to bookshops and you wouldn't normalize reading in that way, but entertainment is still obviously a part of your life. And for you, something like the adaptation of Styles with Peter Dinklage, or an audiobook on Spotify, which you already have an account with, it's just that much more immediate and that much more easy. And you're right that listening has grown massively. And I think that's a huge reason for that. I would say, though, I'm almost going to completely disagree with myself.
Please,
but both are true. It's funny. So we've got amazing teams at PRH Audio who've done all sorts of market research, and one of the things, and anecdotally as well, one of the things that I always sort of bang the drum about is that audiobook listeners are readers too. So audiobook listeners are people like you and I who read voraciously, but there are also things, like I said, Post and a Fate, or I listen to The Busybody having read it as well. But, there might be other things that I only listen to because, I don't know, it's a memoir by a celebrity and I want to hear the celebrity themselves say it. Or I listened to one of Lucy Foley's thrillers, but I read the physical of the other 3 or 4. A lot of people supplement their reading with listening because, well, I think partly because we all feel like there's a lot going on and that we're immensely time poor, and it feels like an effective way to kind of, we're voracious to kind of chomp through all that amazing stuff that's out there, especially Christie related. My God, there's so much. But there's a lot of not very nice ink spilled sometimes in certain quarters about audiobook listening not counting, which, by the way, is like there's a whole ableist issue around that, but maybe that's a whole other conversation. Or just a sort of siphoning off of audiobook listeners. It used to be like they're almost like a different breed, and it's just so not true. Like, anyone is a potential audiobook listener. Everybody, or so many people, had storybook tapes when they were a kid, I can still recite the first page of The Owl Who Was Afraid of the Dark. Plot was a baby bar now, and he lived with his mummy and daddy at the top of a very tall tree. I won't go on, but that gives you a...
I was going to let you go as long as you wanted with that.
or Stephen Fry reading the Harry Potter books. I mean, that was such a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to be really, really abstract and pretentious and ridiculous about it, storytelling is a oratory tradition. It always has been.
Oh, you're going to go back to Homer now, aren't you?
Yeah. It's so funny you should say that, because I'm just re-listening to the Labours of Hercules episodes, the Labours of Hercule episodes, and you're busy getting your book out every week, and Catherine's rolling her eyes.
That's right.
Audibly rolling her eyes.
My big book of Greek myths, which still makes regular appearances actually in my house. It's sitting on my kitchen table right now.
Amazing. But no, but and there's a reason why Christie really works in the audio format. Is because she understood that storytelling was about often slightly more accessible language, and it was about perspective, and it was about twists and turns, and all of those things are what make a physical book brilliant, but they're also what makes an audiobook brilliant. And that's why anyone and everyone should listen.
Yeah. Well, no, and I opened up this episode actually talking about, I had this little anecdote that very early on in the podcast, Catherine and I received this email from a listener who took issue with this offhand comment we had made very thoughtlessly, essentially with that opinion that, we've never gotten into audiobooks, it's just not for us. And I don't think, we didn't actually say it's not really reading, but that was sort of the implication of what we said. And this listener very kindly pointed out the ableism within that, and just how that, was a problematic position to take, especially for two podcasters who were, trying to delight in the world of Agatha Christie. It took me a little while to get it, because I don't listen to as many audiobooks as I think many people do, but I do now pepper it in. And it's funny that you said, when you're listening to a celebrity memoir or just a lot of nonfiction, it really adds something. Like it is really nice to hear those words spoken aloud, especially if they're being read by whoever wrote the book. But even some, in many cases, that's not what's going on. And I've really come around. Like I've had to broaden my horizons, and I'm glad that I have, because I think you're right. It's accessibility, and it's accessibility in terms of perhaps people who might have physical or other barriers to being able to sit down and read an actual text. It's accessibility in terms of time. People, it doesn't necessarily fit into their work schedules, whatever that might mean. And it just kind of, I think it allows for our appreciation of literature to be more nimble and kind of open, no matter what your life might look like. And it's just kind of a widening of the audience who are able to appreciate these texts, because it's just in a different format. And that's ultimately something to be celebrated. And I feel like I had to come over from the dark side and have my eyes opened a little bit. So in some ways, this episode is a little bit of a self-reckoning for me. And you're just a great person to have that with. So that, you didn't even realize that you were doing that. But I think everything you said makes a lot of sense.
I don't know if you noticed, but there was actually a review on the Styles Audible original, somebody saying, I don't have enough sight now to enjoy TV, and this production was a delight. And I thought, it's funny, I saw it when I was preparing to talk to you today, and I thought, that is why I do the job I do. That is why, that's one of the reasons why it's so important. And also, I just want to say, there is a reading crisis, and that is a real problem. And there are obviously important developmental, I don't have to say this to you as a parent, but there are important developmental things around cognition and reading and writing that absolutely must not be ignored. And I don't mean to sort of belittle that problem in any way. But I mean, did you see there's been research recently about how audiobook listening can help curb hearing loss and hone your cognition in that way? And it certainly, I think, drives a sense of empathy, like all reading does, but that way that you experience another dialect or language, or just hear, a connection with an actor or an author, I really, really think it's powerful. And I honestly, I absolutely love my job. I'm so grateful that I get to do it. And Richard Lennon, our publisher, and Hannah Kors and Zoe Willis, they're all amazing people to work for and with. And I really think the industry is going somewhere properly exciting. So yeah, it's all good stuff.
It really is. And I think also important to highlight that in some ways technology is a wonderful thing. We do so much hand-wringing over what technology hath wrought. because there's always a new awful thing that's happening as a result of social media, et cetera, but look at what look at the worlds that audiobooks open up. And then in a similar way, and this is kind of an odd analogy to make, but when also Catherine and I first started out the podcast, we did not have automatically generated transcripts. And I had done, I did that episode a while back now with 3 co-hosts, including Tina Hodgkinson, who I know you know as well, all about ableism. And after that episode, Tina and I had several conversations, and she kept on saying, Kemper, you really need to have transcripts of your episodes, because for people who are hearing impaired, they're actually not able to enjoy these episodes. And it was something that I was trying to figure it out. And at the moment I was figuring it out, we started getting automatically generated transcripts, at least through Apple Podcasts here in the US. And I know this is something that's now just the technology it was always there, but it became that much more accessible and that much easier to do in that moment. And it was this, I just really appreciated it, because it kind of allowed me to do what I wanted to do to make sure that the podcast was that much more accessible to people for whom hearing was an issue, but not seeing. So it's just sort of like technology can be used for such good and to make, all of these works more accessible, and it's just a good thing. So, I see audiobooks as existing both on their own, but also as part of that. That's kind of like adding to this framework that's just allowing everyone, no matter what their disability, so to speak, might be, to be able to enjoy it. So yeah, just really wanted to shout that out. But of course, I have a little bit of a tough question for you, actually, Gray. I couldn't let you leave without asking you, I won't say an uncomfortable question, but something that I think is it's a little bit tricky, and I'm not really sure what the answer is. So, that I recently had your co-host, your podcasting co-host, Mark Aldridge, onto All About Agatha to discuss the BBC Maestro course that came out recently, which features this visual and audio representation of Agatha Christie, the person, teaching a course on writing. She's teaching about the art of mystery, or the craft of writing a mystery. And you were one of the researchers on that team. Mark spoke about that. I was really struck, I have to say, when I reviewed the BBC Maestro course in preparation for speaking with Mark, how good the voice was. In particular, I had some quibbles with the look of Agatha Christie in the finished product. It was still very well done. I mean, everything about that was very obviously meticulously done, including the research, which congratulations to you on being involved in that, because I think the research in particular was just impeccable. But having heard some recordings of Agatha Christie over the years, I thought that the voice was spot on. And Mark even mentioned that he did as well. He talked about how one of the first times he heard one of the generated recordings, he actually thought that it was an original recording of the real Agatha Christie. So this is my segue into asking you about the notion of, quote unquote, Agatha Christie voicing her own books. Because there's been a lot of chatter about this even beyond the BBC Maestro course. I'm going to do something really dangerous now and quote from a Daily Mail article, but here goes. HarperCollins, publisher of the works of Christie, who died in 1976, is said to be keen to explore the prospect of using an AI version of the author's voice to narrate her books, including the Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple novels. The best-selling novelist left 13 hours of audio recordings of her speaking, including dictations she used to write her autobiography, which are seen as ideal for AI use. I remember Mark telling me that much of the dictaphone recordings ended up not being so usable due to quality, but even so, there obviously is enough left that the BBC Maestro people were able to create 2+ hours of material for that course. So I have to imagine that there is absolutely enough there. And in fact, I'm also going to continue to quote from that article and from the global president of the audio division of Penguin Random House, Amanda Diasierno. She said at a conference that it would be, quote, almost negligent not to experiment with AI, but that nothing would ever be done without the consent and support of authors' representatives. So there's obviously a lot of interest in using AI to generate audio of dead authors reading out their own books. And, given that Agatha Christie is Agatha Christie, she's the best-selling novelist ever, that there's just going to be a huge amount of interest in that. And I have to imagine it's a matter of time before that actually happens. And I wanted to get your take on it, how you feel about that, because there is an argument to be made that if you have an AI Agatha Christie reading out her books, then perhaps you're taking work away from the Hugh Frasers and the Amelia Foxes of the world. Not that I'm all that concerned about Hugh Fraser's bank account, but it's, it's an industry and one in which you are very much involved. So I'm just curious how you feel about AI when it comes to audiobooks.
I knew you were going to ask me about this. Look, I mean, none of us really know where any of this is ultimately heading. The first thing that springs to mind to say is what gets caught up in the press and people get very het up about when they talk about AI in the creative industries. One thing we lose sight of is, it strikes me that the notes that I wrote before speaking to you, because I like to prepare. I don't know if you've noticed that listening to our podcast.
I have indeed.
You may have written a couple of notes down, and they were spell checked. And spell check is a form of AI. In one way or another, quote unquote AI has been part of publishing processes, and that includes audiobook production the world over for many, many years. I'm sure that people far more senior and strategic than me will be the ones taking these calls, so I don't have any particular insight. I would say I would hope that any future was led in the way that any sort of path forward was forged in the way that the BBC Maestro project was, i.e. with the full participation and consent and leadership, actually, of the people that protect Agatha's interests. And indeed, one person, Matthew Pritchard, who can easily purport to have known her better than anyone else living, probably. Well, almost definitely. And as I'm sure Mark would have said to you, one of the amazing things about that project is, far from take work away from anyone, 4 researcher writers, including myself, were engaged. An amazing actress, Viv, was engaged. Mm-hmm. It provided work for so many people at BBC Studios and indeed the Christie Estate and beyond. I mean, I'm biased, but I would say that's a gold standard example of how we can use exciting new technology to contribute and create and enrich. And one thing I would say, which might help sort of tie this all up together, actually, is that you pointed out, and you're absolutely right, that the Peter Dinklage version of Styles is not an audiobook, it's something else. And it sits alongside, for example, Audible, it sits alongside a straight reading of The Mysterious Affair at Styles by, I assume, Hugh Fraser, is it, that reads that one?
Yes.
Yes. And there's also the John Moffat version. I am a huge John Moffat fan. I actually think he is the best Poirot, dare I say. And Simon Williams is Hastings. Brilliant. I know. But I was so pleased when you mentioned him earlier. I thought I've got to get that in there while I'm on here. That edition from my colleagues at PRH that deal with the BBC list is up there on Audible. The reading from HarperCollins is up there, the Audible adaptation. I think herein lies the solution, which is that any and all of this technology, it presents opportunities for enrichment and they're supplementary. The book's not going anywhere. I doubt Hugh Fraser's reading is going anywhere. These things are still options to enjoy the story. Maybe there'll be different ways to enjoy the story in the future as well, and maybe some people won't like that, but that's okay, because the book is still there and John Moffat's still there and Peter Dinklage is still there. So yeah, I really think ultimately one of the reasons why there's this slightly fuzzy line that we've been talking about throughout between audiobook and abridgment and adaptation and all the rest of it is because we're moving towards a place in pop culture where actually people don't really care the format in which they are getting their entertainment. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going home thinking I have to watch Netflix. I'm going home thinking I want to unwind and I want to feel companionship and entertainment. And that could take the form of putting on a Labours of Hercule All About Agatha episode, or it could take the form of, I don't know, watching Towards Zero on BBC iPlayer, or any number of things. But the divisions between formats, I think, are breaking down. It's not about, people are realising that we as cultural arbiters, we just want certain needs met, and actually the format is not a barrier or a strict definition as maybe it once was. I think that's the future I'm envisaging, which is exciting.
I agree with that. I mean, I think all of those different things that you just mentioned, you could go home and watch a TV program, listen to a podcast, or read a book, and all of those things can be done on the same device, right? You can do all of those things on a laptop. You could do all of those things on a phone. You could do all of those things even on your TV if you wanted to. I'm sure that you could put an ebook onto your TV and read it on your television screen. I'm sure there are people out there that do that for some reason, and that just wasn't possible 20 years ago. If you wanted to watch TV, you had to sit down in front of your television screen that was on a wall, and sit and watch it. And at that point, then you probably had to watch it with other people, and that would affect your decision making as to what you wanted to watch. And there's just so much more choice and ability to, I think, curate what you want to do. And yes, I think in a lot of ways, all of the lines are getting fuzzy, and with that comes great power but great responsibility, right? It's just like anything else. And that also, as I was listening to your very sensible and I think reasoned response to my rather broad question, there's a responsible way to do things and an irresponsible way. The BBC Maestro course of quote unquote Agatha Christie, Uncanny Valley Agatha Christie, teaching the craft of writing a mystery, was a responsible way of doing it. There are, YouTube audiobooks that are voiced by AI generated bots that are very low quality but free, and that many people use. And in some ways, that's a problem. That's actually, I've been trying to pepper this conversation with some statistics that I learned about audiobooks. And here's another one, which is that 35% of audiobook listeners have listened to an audiobook on YouTube, which is up quite a bit, even in the last 2 years. That keeps on ratcheting up a lot. Like, people are going to YouTube for their audiobooks, which is potentially problematic because the bulk of what you're going to find on YouTube is pirated and potentially not a very high quality, not sort of coming from a system such as the one in which you work, right? Where there are people being employed and there's a lot of quality control and care being put into these products. But that doesn't mean that we should then just dispense with audiobooks altogether. And I like the point that you made about spell check sort of being a version of AI that it's become so commonplace that we don't think of it that way. And it's very similar to the argument I always make when people bring up, how do you feel about editing Agatha Christie's texts for purposes of those depictions stuck in their time that Catherine and I always grappled with when we covered each novel. And where I always begin is I say, well, do you think that And Then There Were None should only be called by its original title? Are you okay with the fact that it's called And Then There Were None? And I think most people are very happy with And Then There Were None being called And Then There Were None. And Agatha Christie herself was okay with the American title always being And Then There Were None. I'm like, okay, well, then you're okay with a little bit of editing, right? You're okay with changing things a little bit. So then it just becomes a matter of degree. It's very hard, I think, to have those bright line, no AI whatsoever, because chances are we're all using a ton of AI in our lives and have been probably for decades, right? So as the technology becomes that much more powerful and interesting, we just have to continue to make those decisions. But it just means that we have to be responsible, not that we have to shut something off or shut ourselves out to a technology that can be used to do great things.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I did mention that one of the things that really excites me about audio in particular is that feeling of intimacy and personal connection. And that is what an amazing actor gives you. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist. Maybe technology will get there. Will I be fully comfortable with that when it happens? Will I still be alive when it happens? Who knows? But all I do know is there are actors out there like, I want to shout out Joe Jameson, who is a very, very popular and well-known voice actor who has so expertly honed his craft and completely focuses in on audiobooks. I mean, he could be this generation's Olivier, but he decided to focus on audiobooks, and it's something that we're incredibly, incredibly grateful for. And actually, I'll give just one other quick example, and it sort of is a bit of a puff piece for Mark, because what else do I do? But the point at which I knew that Mark and I were going to be friends, or really good friends, is we were talking about his audiobook for Poirot, and he asked for a female actor to read it. And Poirot was read by Claire Corbett, and then Marple was read by the incredible actor Jane Slavin, who's a really good friend of mine and is just phenomenal. And Mark said, I thought this was so astute, because for context, most nonfiction like that, you would almost always probably have cast Mark himself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he wanted to do it. I think I'm right in saying a lazy caster may well have just gone, okay, another white guy then, basically, because that's the author. And Mark said, I really wanted a woman because I really wanted, and someone that kind of felt like Christie taken out of time, because Agatha Christie's words are so important to me, and they're so important to that book, and there's so much correspondence quoted in it. And that's something that Mark really hones in on and is really important to him, is always go back to the source, always go back to Christie's words, always represent her properly, you know, and have her at the heart of the story that he's telling about her characters and her adaptations and all the rest of it. And he said, with a female reader, even though he's not female, that's what would be drawn out for the listener. That's what would be emphasized. And I just think it's incredible that means that there is an option to buy a version of Mark's book in a different format that emphasizes an aspect of that book that maybe wouldn't be emphasized if you were just reading the hardback.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so exciting and so brilliant, and sort of gives me goosebumps thinking about the importance of Christie to Mark and to me and to you and to all of us. You know, I know this doesn't fall on deaf ears, that kind of centering of Christie.
No, that's such a good point, and especially because Mark's books, you know, the Poirot and the Marple books are so visual. There's so many book covers, and just they're very busy in the best of ways, because there's so much going on for your eyes when you're looking at them. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an audio aspect to them as well. And I think that's just what everyone is realizing as we just consume more and more by way of our ears, in addition to how we consume by way of our eyes. And as we continue to walk around, I spend half my day with earbuds in, and sometimes it's a little ridiculous. I'm like, okay, I need to take these out and actually interact with the people in my physical space. I hate to be one of those people, whenever I go to the supermarket checkout counter, for example, I take the earbuds out because I think it's rude to have them in.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to things so much more. So the audio aspect of things, and how wonderful that he wanted to emphasize that for the audiobook version, because even though there's so much going on in a visual sense, there's also a way to amplify the audio aspect of, what he's telling us within those books. And that's really important.
I'm picturing you in Walmart listening to the Swinging Christies.
Not Walmart. I'd not.
I don't know. Well, I'm in Tesco's listening to All About Agatha, so there you go.
No, absolutely. Whenever anyone says that I listen to you as I'm cleaning or going to sleep or going to the gym, like, that is the ultimate compliment, because that is when I am listening to all of my favorite podcasts as well.
You don't realize this, but this whole conversation was actually a casting couch. I've been meaning to say to you, I think you should absolutely read audiobooks, Kemper. You've got a lovely voice. I've always maintained, and I still maintain to this day, that Catherine had a beautiful voice as well, and that would have been an amazing alternate career for her as well.
Oh, it would have. I mean, that was one of the reasons that we started doing the podcast, is I had always loved her voice. Such a distinctive voice. And I said, that this is a voice that people will just recognize because of its distinctive flavor. And, she got a little pushback on that, as happens when you open yourself up to the world at large, but I very much still stand by that. So appreciate that. I have 2 more questions for you in closing, and then I'll let you go because you are a very busy man, and I really appreciate all of the time that you've given me here to talk about, this whole world in which you have expertise that you haven't really been able to expound upon that much in the Swinging Christies, but there are multitudes to Grey Robert Brown here. So I'm glad that we've been able to air some of them. This was a question that just came up as you were talking about the process of creating an audiobook. In Hollywood, there's a role that's called the script supervisor, which is basically like, when something's being filmed, you're making sure that all of the words that should be said have been said. And if not, then you kind of have to check, are we okay with this? I have to assume there's someone who's doing that when a book is being read out, who's making sure, did every single word get said? Did it all come through clearly? Is there some sort of a supervisory role during the actual recording of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. And funny, it's a good question to ask because funnily enough, I think that's what a lot of people think I do. And I'm like, no, I wish I had the time to sit in the booth and actually hear the actor bring the book to life. But no, I'm on to casting like 6 books down the line from that by the time that they actually come in. Maybe if I'm lucky, I get to poke my head around the door or get a coffee with them. But most of the time it's kind of on to the next one. But that's the job for us. That's the job of our producer. So we have a team at PRH UK Audio of amazing in-house producers, and we supplement that with a whole host of freelancers as well. And basically, their job is, so it's the actual mechanism of it. So, hitting record and checking the levels and all the rest of it. But they're also listening along with the text in front of them, and they're marking for the sound editor's purposes any, oh, please edit this little stomach rumble out, or could you tighten this pause because they paused a bit too long between these 2 paragraphs and I think it should be a bit shorter, a bit snappier, or did they mispronounce that word? We'll go back and pick that up, but I don't want to interrupt them right now because I don't want to interrupt their flow. And making sure that it's more or less completely verbatim. So that's what they do. And they're amazing. I don't think I would have the concentration, the attention span to be as meticulous as they are. But yeah,
it's definitely a personality type. It's sort of an above the line and below the line bifurcation. I know it's that way in Hollywood. Is sort of the people who are into physical production. What they are doing is very different from, I think, what a lot of the more above the line kind of coordinating aspect of things is. And thank God that there are different people in the world, because there's a huge need for both. And if there are sound effects, is there like a Foley artist who's there doing it, or does that generally get layered in after the fact, or?
Oh yeah, another good question. You're making me
and you just explained that this is not your area of expertise. This is not what you do.
No.
I know you've seen some of them, so I'm imposing on you here.
No, not at all. Well, because when we talk about the production approach, we would brief sound effects, so we would brief the sound editor if we were going down that path in terms of the production approach, saying, this really would necessitate that kind of production. I can't think of an example where we've done something kind of Foley, other than there was a book a few years ago that was a memoir very particularly set in and around Peckham, which is an area of southeast London. And just by chance for another project, one of our producers had recorded some sort of wild tracks, I guess you'd call it, of Peckham atmos. And Peckham's a very particular, there's a big like Black British, particularly Caribbean diaspora there. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of yelling at the fish market, and there's the sound of overgrounds. And so it's a very particular soundscape. And we use some of that for this title. That's probably the only example I can think of. We wouldn't normally do Foley, but then our sound editors have access to these huge libraries, most of which is full of things that they've kind of gathered over the years, over their years of experience, that they kind of stitch together to make a soundscape if and when it's called for. Probably the best example of that I've worked on, a beautiful Japanese translated fiction book called We'll Prescribe You a Cat. And there's a second one coming out this year, which I'm working on now. And the sound designer for that, Tom Robotham, made this beautiful kind of sequence of the sound of the kind of client coming into the doctor's surgery, where if you're unhappy in your life, then you're prescribed a cat to make you feel better is so charming and beautiful. But the reason why we briefed sound effects in that regard, the reason why we went down that approach, was because one of the selling points of the physical book were these beautiful line drawings of the different cats at the start of each section. There are maybe 4 or 5 sections, and a real moment with the sort of the visual component of the text. And I looked at that and I went, how do we, like I said to you earlier, how do we transfer that? How do we transcribe that into another format? And so what came out of that discussion was, well, we represent it, orally. We bring the reader in the way that these line drawings brings the physical reader in. We bring the listener into the world in the way that we can. But yeah, not so much Foley, sadly.
That's really lovely. And it makes me think of the ways in which you would have a book that gets written and then have an illustrator, very traditionally, right? Like we've all, so many of us grew up on those old Victorian novels that had like the lavishly drawn little book plates, that there would be one that, right opposite the cover and then at several points throughout the book. And they would obviously enhance the text, but you could tell that they were extra, right? I mean, it's the same principle. I mean, again, this is just, these are little extra textual bits that are being added in, and it's just a different medium. So it's like you're illustrating, but for the ears as opposed to the eyes.
Exactly that. That's a much more articulate way of putting it. Thank you. You can cut
I never would have gotten there.
Just cut to that. That would be great.
No, I wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for what you just said. And that it's so simple, but I think that's exactly what you're doing when you're creating an audiobook. And these projects do take a fair amount of time as well, right? I mean, one of the things, there was a little bit of conversation in the beginning, even with my books, of, should you, because I do the podcast, should you voice it yourself? And very quickly I said, for the exact reason you identified, I was like, no, this is a female first person narrator. I really want a woman to read this. But I was also told, it's not for the faint of heart. Obviously, how long it's going to take varies based on the length of the book, but just a, fairly standard 90,000-ish, 300-ish page book will take many, many hours to voice, because there's obviously going to have to be some cutting and editing and redoing and revising. So I mean, each of these projects is, I know it varies, but it's at least days long, I would imagine, for each book. Is that fair?
What you've just described, I would probably book in 3.5 days. I imagine. Yeah. And that's the way we run. We do 10 till 1 is your morning session, and then 2 till 5 is your evening session, afternoon session. And anything more than that, I think, will decimate your vocal cord.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how readers do it, really, because it is a lot of time we have lovely studios in-house, but not all studios are as beautiful as ours, shall we say, and it's a lot of time stuck in an airless, windowless room, a bit uncomfortable, your bum's getting numb, and you're sick of saying words. So yeah, it's definitely not for the faint-hearted.
Sounds a little bit like podcasting.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
All right, I have just one question left for you, Gray, because I don't think that I've posed this question to you before. Poirot or Marple?
Oh, Kemper, I made it. I became one of your Poirot or Marple people. I don't know, because I don't know if we probably didn't do that chat at the end of
not on that crossover episode. No, I don't think we did.
No, but I guess because you would have already asked Mark, and I'm desperately trying to remember his answer now. I have a feeling he said Marple, did he?
I don't know if we did ask him, we probably asked him before either of his Poirot or Marple books came out, and I had missed my opportunity having him on for the BBC Maestro. So the next time I talk to him, I have a very good question to ask him. But this is not letting you off the hook, Gray. This is your question. It doesn't matter what Mark says. This is you and you alone.
I'm like the kid that's just checking the workings of the person next to me. Yeah. No, it's no. I don't know why I'm being coy. There's no question for me. It's absolutely Marple, and I don't even fully have much sympathy with the perspective of. I think probably the most common answer from your guests is to say Marple, but Poirot's books are better, or Poirot's books are better.
That's fair.
I don't even know if I fully have sympathy with that perspective, because I think that's maybe ignoring the pure touches of genius in books like Mirror Cracked and Bertram's and Moving Finger. So yes, Marple all the way.
That's not a surprise to me. I mean, having listened to every episode of The Swinging Christies, I know that you are a Christie fanatic and an agathologist who appreciates all of the genius things Christie does besides puzzle making. I know that you appreciate the puzzles as well. We all do, but that I think that, that's I think the source of the traditional answer, where it's like, well, Miss Marple is such a brilliant character, but of course the plotting, the puzzle making in those Poirots, especially from her classic period, is just so wonderful. I feel like I have to say that, but I think you are making a side career out of focusing on so much more, and that's absolutely what I and Catherine have done as well. So that doesn't mean that you can't answer Poirot, because that all applies to Poirot as well, right? But yeah, not a surprising answer, and I approve. So we'll have to find out about Mark. I don't know. This could be a source of contention on a future episode, perhaps, of your podcast.
If he's got his PR hat on, or it's near the paperback of Marple coming out, then I think we know his answer. I'm going to be in so much trouble when he listens to this.
Oh, I just want to get in one more tiny dig at Mark before. Mission accomplished. Great. I so appreciate you giving me as much time as you did. And I think I have a much better understanding of just the audiobook industry after talking to you. And this was just invaluable conversation to have. So thank you so much.
Thank you. No, it's always a pleasure to chat to you.
Who is there who has not felt a sudden, startled pang at reliving an old experience or feeling an old emotion and thinking, I have done this before? Why do those words always move one so profoundly? That was the question I asked myself as I sat in the train watching the flat Essex landscape outside. How long ago was it that I had taken this self-same journey? Had felt, ridiculously, that the best of life was over for me.
Thank you so very much to Gray Robert Brown for that conversation. Hugely helpful in terms of my understanding of audiobooks. I hope and trust you all found it as instructive as I did. I would actually love to close out this episode the same way that I opened it, by reading out a listener message, because a different listener wrote to me upon learning that I was going to do an episode all about the audiobooks of Agatha Christie. And here is what this listener wrote. Dear Kemper, I have so enjoyed your last few episodes as always, and I know you said you are preparing a special episode on the audiobooks of Agatha Christie. I love listening to David Suchet, Joan Hickson, or Hugh Fraser read out a favorite Christie story. They are such talented actors and do a great job of playing all the characters and bringing them to life. I feel compelled to share this small story with you, even though it is a Sherlock Holmes audiobook story and not an Agatha Christie one. Stephen Fry, the actor who plays Jeeves from the P.G. Wodehouse series, among many other things that he has done, has an audiobook version of the definitive audio collection of Sherlock Holmes works. This is no small feat, as it is a total of 72 hours of text. What I did not know is that Stephen Fry has a very personal connection to Sherlock Holmes, and it is because of Holmes that he became an actor. Stephen Fry himself wrote several forewords which are inserted into the audiobook in between various books of the Sherlock Holmes canon, and I have learned the most delightful tidbits of literary history. Even if you are not a fan of Sherlock Holmes, these 8 forewords contained in the audiobook version are delightful and give you so much insight into both the world of Sherlock Holmes and the world of Stephen Fry. I thoroughly enjoyed them. Thank you so much for that message, listener. And it's funny, but Gray mentioned Stephen Fry as the voice artist involved in the Harry Potter books, which he remembered listening to when he was younger. So this is another actor who has just done so much in the audio format. And what I love about this message, and the reason that I saved it for the end of this episode, is that it celebrates the fuzziness that exists between the world of audiobooks and the world of adaptation or more than verbatim unabridged readings. Stephen Fry, the voice artist, saw fit to insert these little anecdotes in the form of forewords when he was voicing the Sherlock Holmes stories. You could choose to be annoyed by that and say, you should just be sticking to the exact words that are printed on the page. But I love that. And I think that my takeaway from all the musing that I've done about audiobooks for this episode is that there is a world of possibility in the audio format. As I put it to Gray toward the end of our conversation, it's illustration for the ears. So in addition to providing the text itself, you can do more. You can enhance that text. And yes, with great power comes great responsibility, but that doesn't mean that the power shouldn't be exercised. And I think people are just beginning to realize how much they can do in the audio sphere. So I'm going to back off from reprimanding the liberties taken in that Audible original production of The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Mainly, I think it's an issue of packaging. I think it needs to be made very clear when an audiobook or audio version of a text is anything other than verbatim unabridged. That too should be marked out clearly. But if it's abridged, we should know. If it's an adaptation with not only added sounds and music, but added scenes and added words, then we should certainly know that. And as both audio consumers and audio creators become more savvy, I have to imagine that will work itself out. That clarity is important, but what's equally important is the accessibility that the audio format provides and the opportunity for greater artistic expression. Both elements, accessibility and opportunity, are to be celebrated, and I cannot wait to see where we go next in the world of audiobooks, and in particular, in the world of the audiobooks of Agatha Christie. Well, that was all about the audiobooks of Agatha Christie. Please do let me know your thoughts on any of this. I know that there are so many passionate listeners of audiobooks out there. Who would have thought that among passionate listeners of a podcast all about Agatha Christie, there would be those who are passionate about audiobooks? Quite shocking. For my next episode, podcast listener and now podcast co-host extraordinaire Helen Frank is back on the show to talk about the real secretaries of Agatha Christie. Oh yes, there are enough for a top 10 list. There were so many secretaries in Agatha Christie's life, many of whom she drew on for the secretaries in her fiction. That's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to bring you that episode. For July's Patreon episode, I reviewed Marble Hall Murders by Anthony Horowitz, a Christie-adjacent modern-day mystery novel, if ever there was one. And then for August, I will be discussing the BritBox documentary Travels with Agatha Christie and Sir David Suchet. So head on over to Patreon if such bonus content interests you. There's a link in the show notes. Email me. I've got letters, but I want more letters about audiobooks or anything else. My address is allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on Instagram at allaboutagatha, and you can find me at my author website, kemperdonovan.com. I've got links to Instagram, the website, and my first 2 mystery novels in the Ghostwriter Mysteries series, all in the show notes. I've also got links in the show notes to the lovely Gray Robert Brown and that website I mentioned, everythingagatha.com. Please leave the podcast a rating and or a review if you haven't yet done so. It really does help me reach other people, and that's something I am always looking to do. And I'll see you next time. Bye.